Welcome to the Lost Links online DRC office hours. Next slide, please. During this presentation, we're going to be sharing topics related to the DRC administration, DRC Lost Links administration, our website, important due dates and procedures, participation and test security, appeals, and additional resources. Before we get started, I just want to introduce my colleagues that are joining me today. Abe Christ is here. He's our bureau chief. And Laurie Bierbaum is our project manager from DRC.
Hi.
Next slide, please. So this year we have introduced a new resource for you, the Connecticut DRC Lost Links website. This has replaced what some of you may be familiar with is the DRC Digital Library. And you can see that at the very top, there are recent communications. On the left-hand side is information related to assessment administration, and that would be our in-person administration. And on the right side is our new Lost Links remote administration resources. And it makes sense to keep checking in here because we are adding resources regularly. In fact, they are coming in quicker than I can communicate to you about them. So please keep checking. Next slide, please. And if you have questions, I just wanted to remind you, please place them in the question box on your right, and we will answer them during the presentation and following our initial slide presentation. And any questions that we don't get to during the presentation, we will be responding to after the session. So this slide was in our original office presentation, and it highlights the due dates for specific tasks related to the assessment administration. One of them is the alternate assessment eligibility form, identifying students who participate in an alternate assessment. And then another one is the domain exemption registration. Both of these were due on January 15th. But I wanted to tell you that we know that PPTs occur throughout the year, so that if you have new students who fit these categories, please continue to enter them in the form, which is on our website and available to you. One of the directions are in the accommodations guidelines because there's a difference whether a student is in grades 3 through 8 and 11 versus K2, 9, 10, and 12 in terms of the alternate assessment eligibility form. There's two processes to communicate this to us. And the important thing to keep in mind here is that these are students that are exempt from the Lost Links assessment because it's not appropriate for them. We don't have an alternate ELP assessment at this time. And regarding the domain exemption, these are students who typically would not participate in one of the subtest areas. This would be speaking or listening, depending on their disability. And these would be submitted to us so that they do not, their scores are not reflective of that disability. When you're setting up your test sessions, you want to make sure that you include all 4 subtests, even for those students who have a domain exemption, because this list is used to compare to the 4 subtest areas, and if one is missing, we can see if the child is on our domain exemption list, and then their scores are adjusted appropriately. The other due date on here for January 15th, which I recognize has passed, is the accommodated paper form. This is for students who, for various reasons, typically an accommodation, need to be tested on a paper form. These can be ordered even after the due date, but you need to be billed in time for the materials to be delivered and returned. So related to that return, the return date for all accommodated and paper forms, the last date to request pickup is March 10th in order for the test to be processed within the appropriate time frame. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk a little bit about participation expectations. So generally, the CSE expects universal participation on all state summative assessments for 2021. Ideally, we want to make sure that all students are tested in a safe in-person environment, but we recognize there are situations where the student needs to be testing remotely, and that's why we have the remote option. Around the participation, we have applied for a federal waiver regarding accountability. So if the waiver is granted, then we will not be categorizing schools based on scores or participation. So it's important that you test your students as much as possible in a safe manner, preferably in person, so that you have accurate results to make programmatic decisions and to see which students have exited. Next slide, please. So we have provided extensive guidance and resources related to remote assessment. And based on feedback and emails we're getting at this point, we wanted to make it very clear that if a student is being tested in person, that student should be using the secure browser provided by DRC on their computer. If a student is being tested remotely, then the student must use the restricted URL provided in our guidance documents to be tested. The difference here is, and one of the things that we'll talk about in a minute, is the test monitoring application. The functioning of that, we wanted to design a test that could be administered remotely, attending to the needs of security and validity. So we have a test monitoring application that is embedded in the URL for remote testing. So the test administrator conducting the remote testing does not need to do anything else regarding adding or adjusting for test monitoring. What they must have is permission set in the Insight portal by your English Learner Assessment Coordinator to provide permissions to access the test monitoring, which will allow them to get their code to administer the test remotely. All of this is covered in the PowerPoint and guidance documents for remote testing. Next slide, please. One of the other areas that I wanted to clarify today is the appeals process. The appeals process was discussed at the English Learner Assessment Coordinator workshop, and the slides related to that are on our website right now under Assessment Administration. I wanted to clarify that the English Learner Assessment Coordinator is the one person that should be entering these appeals into the appeals system. And the reason that we emphasize that is because, like our assessment program in general, we want one point of contact in each district that the information flows through so that the information can be accurate and that they can monitor how testing is going in their district and potentially provide additional retraining if needed. When you're entering the appeals, it should be based on one student at a time and one subtest at a time. If you have a student who has irregularities in more than one subtest area, please enter them separately. This allows us to track them on the spreadsheet that we have created from the survey that you enter to process these in a timely manner. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic that was also shared with you at the English Learner Assessment Coordinator Workshop. On the left-hand side, you'll see the components of the Insight portal. And on the right-hand side, you'll see what the student experiences when they go into the in-person environment. You'll see on the bottom is the Insight browser link that they should be accessing for in-person testing. And above that is the link that they can access for practice testing. The practice test can be accessed outside of the secure browser and can be done at home, which allows the student to become familiar with the tools within the platform. Next slide, please. So these are the tools that I was mentioning earlier about the test monitoring application. So on the remote side, remember I said on the right side of the website in the first box, talks about the remote testing guidance and resources. The first one here is the remote test administration with the test monitoring application, which is a PowerPoint that you can share with your staff to ensure that teachers administering the remote know what they have to do in the sequence of events to administer the test remotely. There's also a live demonstration with the side-by-side view showing what the student sees and what the teacher would see as they're progressing through the remote administration. We've been asked why the link to the remote administration is within the test instructions for the test administrator. The reason is because we want to make sure that the link is not shared or bookmarked or favorited, that's a word, throughout the environment in the district, and we don't want it out there without the guidance and sequence of events that go with that. It's very prescriptive, and we want to make sure all of the teachers understand how important it is to potentially guard that URL for security reasons and test validity. And again, I want to emphasize that if the student is in school, they should be testing with the secure browser. Because initially we had some questions about using the test monitoring application within the school setting, we have also created a PowerPoint to provide you information about how that is applied optionally within the school setting. And I stress the word optionally here because the default setting is that you do not have to do anything at all to provide access to your students to the test. If you want to use the remote, to use the test monitoring application in the school setting, there are settings that you would need to adjust. And again, the test monitoring application is embedded in the URL for any remote testing. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've been creating additional resources for you to use that we hope help you facilitate your testing. We know it's a difficult, especially this year. So we have created the Form D Test Administration Manual, which is essentially what is said during testing for your students, either in person or remote, because the test, remember, is the same. We've also created a slide presentation about how to access the practice test. And these are already posted to our portal or to our website right now. And within, I'm hoping by mid-February or sooner, we will also have guidance about testing students who are placed out of the district. We had many conversations with English Learner Assessment Coordinators about the difficulty of testing students who are placed outside the district, remembering that you have the responsibility to ensure the testing of these students. And we wanted to provide a means for you to do that remotely this year because we know it's a very difficult year. Next slide, please. So this is your opportunity to, again, place questions in the question box, and they can be general questions about the lost links, in-person, remote, or anything else related to assessment, lost links. And in some cases, I can respond to questions related to not lost links. Do we have any questions in the question box?
Yeah, hi, Janet. Yeah, as Janet mentioned, if you have questions, you can shoot them in the question box. And we have received a handful, and I know Lori's been responding already to many of them, so we're not going to address them if Lori has responded. I've actually responded to a couple. If they're very general, we respond back to the whole group, so you'll see the question that was asked and the response. So we have a couple here, Janet, and I think even though you've gone over some of these things already, let's, I guess, just in fairness to the question, we can ask them though. So can a relative give permission on the parent agreement form if they are the ones home with the students during the day of testing?
I'm glad you brought this up because we've had many conversations about the parent agreement for remote testing. Our initial guidance was that the parent would participate in the agreement and ideally be the person supporting the student technologically with the assessment. Since that time, we've been working with our ELACs and our advisors. We recognize that often students are home with older siblings, grandparents, or caregivers. So what we are suggesting, and this should be documented very carefully in your remote test administrator notes, that the parent agrees to have someone else essentially take on the role of the parent guardian during testing. So that person could be an older sibling, it could be a caregiver or a grandparent, but again, it's something that you need to really go over the responsibilities with whoever that person is in addition to the parent, and have documentation that they agree to uphold those responsibilities. And they should follow through in terms of just supporting the student accessing the test without assisting them on any actual test items. I forgot to mention that within the window on the right is our PowerPoint, so you can access that. The handouts are right there. And also, I would like to introduce Michael Sabatos, who's here with us too.
Okay, thanks, Janet. I have another one for you. And again, I think you've covered this stuff, but in fairness to the question, we'll restate it and we can ask or answer it again. And again, just to repeat, I know Lori is responding directly to some of these questions. If that's the case, we're not going to handle them via the audio feature. So is Form D the only in this year? When I was setting test sessions, I saw that Form D was the only option available.
That's correct. At the in late summer, we initially were hoping to roll out our new Form E as a field test. That was the guidance at the beginning of the summer. But as COVID impacted us all more, we decided that in fairness to you all and to the needs of the students, we would move to only one form. That way we could have the same form available, Form D, both on-site, in-person, and remote. That means that if your student, when you're creating your 4 subtests into the test session for all your students. It doesn't matter if they're remote or in person, you're going to have the 4 subtests in a test session for the student. That means that if a student begins a test in person using the secure browser at school, and suddenly has to move to a remote environment, that student can continue using the remote URL to finish all testing. So there's that interplay allowed.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Another question. In the past, I have set up testing sessions by grade. This year, is it necessary to separate out remote testers versus in-school testers in a test session?
No, you can set up your test sessions however is manageable for you, and you can continue in that manner. If you do have remote testers, you need to make sure that any teacher who will be administering the test remotely has the test monitoring permission or in their user role in order to do that.
Yep, and Janet, I just want to add to that any students that are tested in person just need to be tested through that DRC Insight Secure browser. And use of the test monitoring application is optional for those in-person testers. And you only need to adjust your test session if you're going to use test monitoring for in-person testing. So I'll make sure I send this to all so it's clarified.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Janet. There's a question about a domain exemption. Can you just, well, Janet, can you just touch on that real quick? And if Janet doesn't ask the question, maybe you can email the question, because to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure of the question here. But Janet, can you just touch on the domain exemption?
Sure. Domain exemptions are for students who are duly identified, meaning the student is identified as an English learner and has an IEP or a Section 504 plan that guides their instruction and assessment. Typically, for a domain exemption, you might have a student who is deaf, for example. That student would be considered potentially for a domain exemption for the listening test, because it may not be appropriate for them to be able to access. So they would, the ELAC would complete the domain exemption form. We would be able to remove that student from the listening test when it came time to score, and the student's overall score would reflect the other 3 subtests. Do I have that right, Michael?
Yep, that's correct.
Mike, I got a question for you here. Since you're there, how do we access past year scores? They are no longer available on the site.
Actually, Lori, isn't there some archived information?
I guess I would have to, yeah, so within the DRC interactive reporting, I believe they have 3 years of data going back to 2017. On demand is just the current year's report, but is there a specific report that's trying to be accessed or year?
Just to add to, like, EdSite goes back to 15-16.
Yeah. I think
So,
that there wasn't a year distinguished here, but yeah, Mike, as I was headed towards, I know EdSite, there's a rich amount of data back to 15-16. So thank you.
it may be related to permissions. So if you're the ELAC and you're not seeing those accessible reports, you can send either any of us an email and we will get that looked into to see if your permissions are set properly. If you're not an ELAC, then your ELAC has to provide that permission for you.
Thank you. Janet, or maybe Lori, how do you, again, I think you touched on this already, but how do you log in as a student to stop the test if the administrator feels as if there's an irregularity? Do you log in through the URL or someplace else?
Yes, you can log it. There's actually some text in the Connecticut Lost Links remote instructions for test administrators, and it instructs you to log into that public URL. You're going to enter the credentials from the student's test ticket, the username and password, and it will in effect kick the student out of the test, as well as you as the second person trying to log into the test.
Okay, thank you. Next question, I think this is for Michael. Again, Mike, now that my PSIS person has updated the 2 students, I imagine you guys have had a communication about them. How long before DRC rosters them into the site?
So what'll happen is every day, Monday through Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we send DRC a file. And the next morning, generally, DRC's been very good as far as getting those kids rostered. So for what's important is having your PSIS person do it before 3, because then it's more like, because then probably they're going to show up the next morning.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Janet,
Can I add on that? One situation that's come up as we're looking at the data so far, DRC's been nice enough to send me some weekly files. What we are seeing is ELACs were given the ability to go into Insight and be able to add accommodations, but that's also given you the ability to change student demographics or even add students. And I would really ask you, please don't do that. It can create a bunch of problems down the road and even ultimately lead to the rejection of a student's test record. So really, the process for adding students to Insight it starts with PSIS registration. Having your data person for PSIS indicate that the student's now in registration, and us transferring the record to DRC and DRC rostering that kid. Otherwise, like I said, it can cause real problems down the line and even lead to a test record being thrown out. So please avoid that temptation.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Lori, I don't know, maybe Janet, this is you, but this one came in a little bit ago, so I'm sorry I didn't see this one. So teachers getting kicked off the web hosting app, I'm assuming the test administration app they're referring to. What should be done in this situation? Is there any advice about that if they're kicked off?
Is this a remote administration?
It doesn't specify, but I'm assuming it is, yeah.
Okay.
And they're getting kicked off. Did you say their web conference platform?
Yeah, web hosting.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, if maybe you can, you know who you are in terms of asking this question, email abe.chris@ct.gov, provide a little more information. I'll try to do our best to get you an answer on that one.
The other thing is we have a device check application on the website that might support you in making sure you have enough bandwidth and that all systems are go before you test. And if you're doing a remote test, you want to make sure that it's very difficult, I understand, if you have students with siblings in the home who are also doing schooling, their streaming may affect the applications as well. So if you can test when the others are not if you can test when the others are not doing live streaming, that would probably be beneficial too.
So that the questionnaire actually clarified that as it was referring to the web, not the web hosting, like not the test administration app, but the actual meeting. So Zoom or Google. Do you have any advice on in terms of that if that happens, Janet?
I think that might be more so with their district IT people. and working with the device check. If your student has internet access through a hotspot or something like that, that may impact how well all the computers in the household are accessing it.
Yeah, and if this is like from a test administrator's perspective and the actual test administrator is getting boosted from, Zoom or Google, I do think it is probably checking to make sure you're probably close enough to your host or wireless site, or checking in with your district on your bandwidth.
Yeah. And I guess, if it's not an issue in terms of loss testing, I mean, they're always, and just to piggyback on what Janet and Lori said there, obviously, if it's an issue strictly with the meeting device, then it would be a district issue. But if it does throw off the testing, there's the array of appeals that can be used to potentially, if you're kicked off for the whole testing session. All right, so Mike, I'm gonna head your direction with this one. Do students need to complete all sections of the LOS in order to count towards a district participation rate? Go ahead, you can take that.
No, as long as they've got a score in one subtest, they're a participant.
Okay. And just to piggyback, thanks, Mike, in terms of participation and the critical nature of that every year, we are applying, and I'm not sure if Janet touched on this, but if she did, I'll say it again, and if she didn't, it's some new information for you. We are currently applying for a waiver to relax our accountability measures. So this need, although we are expecting universal participation, if we were to get the waiver, that'll help kind of with this worry about participation. So keep that in mind. Watch out for news from us. I know it's heading to the feds very shortly. In fact, it might have already been sent in the last day or so.
So with that in mind, you may want to prioritize your students and when you test them, with a preference toward in-school testing. And maybe if you know students who you anticipate will exit, go ahead and test them first.
All right, there's one more question. We've hit every single one that's come in to our best ability. And so it relates to the age of a sibling in terms of acting as a parent. And Jan, I know we don't have a hard count in terms of that, but it probably relates more to the maturity, but I'll let you take that because I know you've answered this one before.
The CSD isn't being prescriptive about the age of the student, but as a test administrator, you want to bear in mind being aware of legal ramifications of young children home alone, that sort of thing. You want to make sure that the student who is acting in the role as the parent understands the validity points related to the assessment and can follow through with just accessing the technology and following through with the guidance, because they may be tempted to help their sibling with the best of intentions. So you really need to monitor that as a test administrator.
Thanks, Jan. That is a tricky subject. I mean, as you all know, this is the first year we're doing remote testing. We're doing our best because we believe it's incumbent on us to provide an opportunity. And so some of these issues we're learning as well and refining our answers as we speak. So we appreciate these questions. Okay, so I guess you heard that the questions were down to 0, so you've provided us some more. So I think, so there's a question about parents being away from work and the parent isn't able to be home for the testing. This is sort of related to that similar theme. Janet, you want to touch on that?
In having additional conversations with ELACs and our advisory board, we have been discussing. Initially, we suggested strongly that parents are in the home during the assessment. We would certainly prefer that, but we recognize that many parents have to work, and the student that you will be testing is home, potentially with older siblings, grandparents, other caregivers. And as long as the parent agrees that that other person can act in the role of parent guardian for testing purposes, and the district documents it very well, we're okay with that.
There's another question about the test monitoring application. I'm not sure I understand that one. So if you could email me at abe.chris@ct.gov, I'll check in with Janet about that. Thank you. Okay, so we've gotten down to 0 here on the questions. So I'm gonna give it 30 seconds, and if you have any more, please drop them in and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay, say thank you. Then there's one more question. What if no adult is able to be present for remote testing? This is along the similar lines, Janet, about siblings and so forth.
You would need someone to act in that role to be able to complete the parent agreement.
Yeah.
And again, we recognize that parents have to work. So that's why we've kind of extended the potential timing of the testing for remote. We certainly would like it done during school hours, but recognize that that isn't always possible.
Okay, we're going to give it another 30 seconds here. The questions are empty, but Lori, thanks for writing them back, and Janet, thanks for taking them. Michael, thanks for taking them. We'll give it another 30 seconds here for any more that you'd like to ask. Okay, seeing none, Janet, I'll turn it back over to you, and you can wrap things up. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Abe. So our contact information is in the handout that's provided on the screen for you, and it will be posted as well on the Connecticut DRC Last Links website. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or concerns. Thank you for taking the time to attend today. And thanks, Lori and Michael and Abe and Michelle.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.